Today we are looking at Rutgers basketball, one of the more intriguing teams I think ahead of the 2025 college basketball season, and a team that I think really could go a lot of different ways. I think in some ways this is a low floor, high ceiling team, and we're going to get into that in just a moment. But before we move ahead, I want to recap last year for Rutgers, which was not a good year for Coach Pikel, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And Rutgers, they finished 15-17 overall. They were 7-13 in the Big Ten, and they lost their one game in the Big Ten tournament. And this is a team that over the past handful of years has been one of the best defensive teams in the country, and they just haven't been able to figure out the offensive side of the ball. And unfortunately, last year they had lost Cam Spencer, who turned out to be a vital piece for UConn. And when you watched him on UConn and you looked at the Rutgers team, it's like, wow, that team really could have been a lot better with a guy like Cam Spencer. Now, 15-17 is, it's a below 500 year. It's not a good year. However, Coach Pikel, the last couple of times he was in the NCAA tournament, I believe he had a Harper brother on his team. And now coming into next season, he's got another Harper brother ready to join him. And as we go into the roster here, we'll get into that in just a moment. But before we get to the new players, we got to go over who left and who is still there. So who's gone? Well, Big Clifford Amarui, I believe that's how you pronounce that name, Gavin Griffiths, Derek Simpson, Mawat Mag, and Antonio Choi are among the notable names that left the Rutgers program, either out of eligibility or via the transfer portal. And the big name, Amarui, he's been one of the better defensive centers in the country the past couple of years, and he transferred to Alabama, and that is a big loss for Rutgers, and one that is not going to be easy to replace. The other players, I do think they're certainly replaceable, but Big Cliff down low is not so easy to replace for a program like Rutgers. It's really hard to get big men, and we'll see that in just a moment. Now, who stayed? Jeremiah Williams stuck around, Jamichael Davis stuck around, and Emmanuel Agbale stuck around. And they're kind of all, like Williams, for example, was technically Rutgers' leading scorer, but he didn't play until 2024 last year and only played about 12 games. Jamichael Davis is an intriguing defensive guard, but did not shoot it well at all last season. And Agbale he's the center with size, but he played very limited minutes last year and averaged 2 points and 2 rebounds. So you're not exactly sure if you can get the production that you'd need from that position from him. You've got 3 guys coming back from a team that was, below average, certainly last season. And those 3 guys are there's no one that you can really say, hey, I trust this guy's going to do X. You don't really have that coming from last year's roster, or the guys who held over, I should say. So who's new? Well, you've got basically 4 transfers coming in, and you've got 5 freshmen. So you've got a very new roster, right? And let's go over the transfers before I get to the freshmen that I'm sure most of you guys are waiting on here. So the transfers, we've got Tyson Acuff, who did average over 20 points a game at Eastern Michigan. PJ Hayes, who's a 6'6 wing coming in from San Diego. Jordan Derekak, who did average over 16 points a game at Merrimack and did a number of different things, like averaged over 6 rebounds. Seems like a versatile player. Zach Martini is a 6'8 forward center who played some center certainly at Princeton last year, but was not their leading rebounder. And so it's interesting, all of these guys, provide something for Rutgers, but they're not well-rounded players, I think, besides Derek Hack. And with him, the question is, can he maintain that multifaceted game at a higher level? Now, the freshmen. I mentioned Dylan Harper a little bit earlier, and Ace Bailey. And those are the stars of the team. And we'll talk about them a little bit more in a second here. You've also got Lathan Somerville, who's a 6'10", 275-pound big, which is going to be important for Rutgers this season. And Bryce Dortch and Dylan Grant, who are, ranked outside the top 100. I see them as like multiple year guys for the Rutgers program, and they're both like wing 6'7", 6'8", so good size coming into Rutgers. Now, going back to Bailey and Harper, I think both those guys are going to be outstanding. Like, just excellent players at Rutgers, the next level. I think they're really good players right now, and I think they'll get better as the year goes on. And, in particular, specifically, like Ace Bailey is a really good scorer. He's got great size at 6'8", 195. And the only question with him this season is, like, what position is Rutgers going to play him at? Because I think skill-wise, he can certainly be a 3. But I think on this team, he may have to play more at the 4, just based off of who's available. But we'll have to see how Coach Peichel manages the rotation in the roster, which we'll get into in a second. And then Dylan Harper is just a big guard who I think offensively will play as the point guard for this team. And then defensively is probably the shooting guard. But that also depends on how Coach Peichel wants to use his lineups and rotation. And let's just say that, I think there's a lot of questions with how this roster is going to shape up. And I think before I get into the rotation and the lineup, I want to go over those questions, because the first one I think is obvious. Who's going to play at center? How do they manage the minutes at center? Do they want to play with the traditional center with Agbale and Somerville? Or do they want to mix in more minutes with Zach Martini at center? Some people have mentioned the idea of Ace Bailey at center. I just don't see that happening at all. I don't think he's big enough. But maybe different matchups, opponents, they could get away with that for limited minutes. I think Martini's the more small ball center option, the more justifiable option there. And then more importantly, I think there's a lot of pieces on this team. I think there's some guys who are better offensively, some guys who are better defensively. But I think the biggest question for Coach Peichel is, how does he maximize Harper and Bailey? And as a Duke fan myself, like, this team is very reminiscent of the Jabari Parker, Rodney Hood Duke team from, I guess, about 11 years ago now, where those two guys were outstanding, just excellent basketball players. The problem was that the pieces around them didn't fit in. They had some guards who were good, but they didn't really know how to play around those two players. They weren't great fits around them. And then the other side, they didn't have a center who could protect the rim. And so there were lots of times where, Jabari Parker did play some minutes at center, or he was the power forward, and they just didn't have rim protection at the center spot. Their defense wasn't great. And a lot of these things seem rather familiar with this Rutgers team, at least on paper. And I'm curious how it's all going to fit together, because on paper, when I look at this team and I project the lineup in the rotation, I think this is what I came up with. And I gotta say, I've done, I think, about a little less than 10 teams so far. This has been the hardest team to kind of figure out what their lineup and rotation is going to be, because, okay, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, those two guys are going to start. No question about it. But the other 3 starters, lots of questions, at least as far as I'm concerned. And I ended up going with Dylan Harper, JaMychal Davis, who was named a captain for this team. I think that's important. Ace Bailey, Zach Martini, and Manuel Agbole as your starting 5. I think Davis, Martini, and Agbole, any of that could be shifted. I do think Martini, though, is a guy who maybe wouldn't go Sharpie, but I think I would certainly write him down in pencil as a starter for this team. And the question is, does he play more as a forward, like that power forward spot, or center? I think he'll get minutes at both positions. It's just where do they start him? I think Agbale and Somerville will combine for about 20-25 minutes, and Martini will play 15 to 20 minutes at center for this team. So with that being the starting lineup, off the bench, I have Jeremiah Williams and Tyson Acuff, who are going to be your guard scorers for this team coming off the bench, along with Jordan Derkak, the aforementioned Lathan Somerville, and PJ Hayes. Those are the 10 guys who I think are going to be part of the rotation. I don't know if he will play all 10. I think a lot will depend upon how Agbale and Somerville look and how many minutes Coach Pikel will give them, and then how does he rotate the rest of the roster when he has to play maybe a little bit more up-tempo. So maybe that does mean he's got to go a little bit deeper to justify, playing a little bit more like 1-3-1 zone, a little bit more full court press, just to kind of take away some of the lacking at that center, that rim protection. So kind of mask some of that with some of the other options defensively. So now, with that being said, we'll go into the schedule and predictions. So we are looking at a non-conference schedule which features some tough games. And they're in this Players First tournament in Las Vegas, which will consist of games against Notre Dame, Alabama, and Houston. And then they also have notable non-conference games against Seton Hall, local opponent, and then a neutral game against Princeton, another local opponent for Rutgers. In conference play, they'll play home and away against Purdue, Michigan, and Penn State. They'll play at home against Michigan State, Illinois, Iowa, Minnesota, UCLA, USC, and Wisconsin. And on the road against Indiana, Maryland, Nebraska, and Northwestern, Ohio State, Oregon, and Washington. So, with that being said, now it's time to get into the predictions for next season. Reminder, last year this was a 15-17 team, 7-13 in the Big Ten. I think they're going to be a better team. I don't think it's going to be like night and day better. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of turnover on this roster, and I'm not sure that the pieces fit great around Bailey and Harper. So I have them going 8-3 in non-conference. I honestly think there is a world where they lose all three of those games in the Players First tournament. I think Notre Dame's going to be pretty good this season, or at least above average. But I have them 8-3. I think they'll beat Seton Hall and Princeton. Then in conference play, I have them going 11-9. I think the Big Ten is going to be good. I do think, though, that's a number that could improve. Like, I could see them going like 13-7. Because I do think they'll improve as the year goes on, as they figure out who are the better players to surround their two stars. But as of now, I have them at 19-12, which would probably put them right on the bubble of the NCAA tournament. But guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. Rutgers fans, I'm curious, who do you think is going to start and be part of the rotation? Non-Rutgers fans, let me know what school you'd like to see me profile next. And with that, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're going to be doing college basketball and NBA draft content here. So if you love that, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.